Miami's shooting was abysmal in Game 5, dooming their chances at closing out the series in New York. Did the Knicks regain momentum from the win? How do they keep Jimmy Butler from dominating? We break down what went wrong for the Heat in today's playoff edition of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat. I'm Wes Goldberg here with David Ramil. However you might be tuning in on YouTube or your favorite podcast app, thanks so much for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. We are recording this a few minutes after the Heat's 112-103 loss to the New York Knicks at Madison Square Garden. All playoffs, the Heat could just count on Jimmy Butler. They could just keep things close, even carve into a double-digit deficit in the fourth quarter, and then Butler would just sort of inevitably take over in the biggest moments of the game. That did not happen tonight, David. For a moment, it looked like Jimmy was about to take over the game. The Heat had come back from 19 points down. They were down 6 with 4 minutes to go. Jimmy scores on a driving layup. Then he hits an 18-footer on the next possession. Then he gets a hand on an R.J. Barrett three-pointer, gets fouled on the other end, makes one of his free throws, and that puts the Heat down just 2 with 2.5 to go, and it felt like the rally was on. But those were all the points that Butler was going to score in the fourth quarter. The full takeover never happened. The Heat lose the game. And for the first time, really all playoffs, Jimmy Butler looked human and the Heat lost. Were you like me and just sort of expecting him, waiting for him to take over that game and kind of sustain that burst?
Yeah, he never really put his stamp on the game. I mean, there were a couple of plays there. He had another crucial, monumental block, another highlight reel type block. And then he, like you said, he put a hand on that ball, a couple plays here and there, but never really established himself. He just looked out of sorts in a way that we haven't. Like, even when he first came back from injury, he still had that big Game 3. He was very good in Game 4, even though he wasn't particularly dominant. But today, for whatever reason, and this isn't to take away credit from the Knicks, Quentin Grimes did a pretty good job of being more physical with him. He played all 48 minutes of the game. You have to give him credit for that. And I think he was using that physicality to a certain degree, maybe to wear down Jimmy, who just didn't seem to have that spark the way that we expected him to, the way that we've come to see so regularly in these playoffs. So a surprising lack of effort, perhaps, from Jimmy, or perhaps a lingering injury. It's hard to really quantify that. I'm sure he would dismiss any notion that the injury has limited him. He didn't even bring it up after the win in Game 4. So my feeling is that maybe it's bothersome, but you also have to give credit where credit is due to the New York Knicks for doing a pretty good job of making things more difficult for him. They were actively sending 2 on the ball whenever he had possession, forcing him into passes. When he drove the lane, they would collapse on him and have to make a bad pass or something like that, or a contested pass.
I think he scored 19 points on 12 shots. You would have liked to see more shots, but in terms of, he was running the offense for so much of that first half. Every single play was like Jimmy brings the ball up. They set a staggered screen with Bam and Kevin Love, or Bam and Max Strus, or somebody else like that. And then Jimmy would get into the paint and then kick out, and then the Heat would miss an open three-pointer. But he finished with 9 assists and only 1 turnover. Like, it's the same Jimmy Butler as in terms of like that super efficient, not turning the ball over, not really making mistakes. Yeah. The difference was this was more like regular season Jimmy Butler, where he doesn't make mistakes, but he also doesn't sort of take over and turn into Michael Jordan 2.0 and just start carving up defenses the way that he had against the Milwaukee Bucks and in many games against the New York Knicks. After making that free throw with 2.5 minutes left, he doesn't take another shot for the final 2.5 minutes of the game, with the game hanging in the balance, right? The Heat had come back from all the way down from 19, and this was very much a game until the very end. Yeah. And it was kind of out there, just ready for Jimmy Butler to just grab it. And he never grabbed it the way that he grabbed it in Milwaukee to close out that series in 5 games in the first round, right?
Turned the ball over late in the game as well. I mean,
it was his one turnover. Like this is what he did. He did not shoot after that 2.5 minute mark where he made that last free throw. He fouls RJ Barrett, a bad foul call, and then turned the ball over when Quentin Grimes seemed to have like hyperextended his knee or something when he landed
Right.
into a Bam Adebayo screen, kind of crashed into Bam, hyperextended his knee. He falls over, obviously hobbled. And then I'm ready for like the story to the game at that point to be, okay, here's Jimmy Butler actually targeting the injured guy the way that the Knicks didn't do at the end of the game in game one. Jimmy Butler being the smarter, high basketball IQ player. This is the difference of the Miami Heat. Like the story almost writes itself. And then Quentin Grimes steals it from Jimmy Butler. And that's basically the game. That was like, I think the last time Jimmy even touched the ball in the
Yeah.
game.
Yeah. New York made a lot of the momentum shifting plays that we saw from Miami. You know how it was in game 4, where even though the Knicks, closed the lead to 4-6, somewhere around there, Miami always found a way to answer, whether it was a big steal or turnover, a big shot from Kevin Love or Kyle Lowry or somebody along those lines. That wasn't the case. In fact, it was the inverse, where New York was making those kind of plays, and they stepped up. They had a very good game overall. And look,
it was the first time the Heat were outplayed, I think, in the entire playoffs. Obviously, it was not their first loss, but I think it was the first time where the Heat were just thoroughly outplayed by their opponent. Because the first loss,
that game too. I mean, the game.
I thought that was just
Milwaukee
making a bunch of shots.
That's fair.
That was just, I thought the Knicks made shots. They also missed a bunch of open shots too. I didn't think that the Knicks just like caught. What did the Knicks end up shooting in this game? 30%. No, that was
38%.
38%. That's a pretty good rate, but I thought that they earned those. They earned
50%
that 38%.
overall from the field, at 40 free throw attempts, which we'll talk about a little bit later on in the game. It was, the criticism on Julius Randle for saying that Miami wanted it more in game 4. I don't know that, as we're recording this, they're probably in their post-game presser right now. I don't know if somebody's going to say something like that, but I think it was pretty evident also that New York may have wanted it more in game 5. And that's why it was always Heat in 6, as far as I was concerned. I think now they have a good opportunity to come back home, close it out here. You wish they could have done it a little bit sooner so they could have gotten some rest and prepare for either Boston or Philadelphia. And this is not to overlook New York completely in game 6. I don't think that Miami did anything egregiously wrong. Yes, they were outplayed, but they still cut a 19-point lead down to 2 in the fourth quarter. The game was there for them. They just couldn't close it out. They had exerted so much energy. And again, a lot of the momentum shifting plays falling in New York's favor, and Miami missing out on capturing some of that momentum with every missed Kevin Love 3, or even Duncan, who did play fairly well. He hit 5 of 10 from his 3-point attempts. He missed a couple down the stretch, that one particular that rattled in and out, and it could have broken New York. I think it would have even given Miami a lead, or at least cut the lead down to 1, and maybe established a little bit more of a energy shift in Miami's favor. They just didn't get it today. So you move on.
It was the inverse. It was the inverse of game 4, right? Where the Heat were getting all the 50-50 balls. They were the ones on the crashing the offensive glass. The Knicks had 14 offensive rebounds. The Heat had 11. And most of those offensive boards came in the first quarter when the Heat led by 24-14. And it felt like the Heat might be cruising their way to a win. And the Knicks battled back. And so I'm with you. I think more of the credit has to go to the Knicks. The Heat also missed a lot of wide open threes, like a lot. Not so much in the first half, but really to start that third quarter, it was pretty egregious and noticeable. And it kind of gets to a bigger issue that we're talking about here with the Miami Heat, an issue from the regular season, kind of creeping back into things here in the playoffs. We'll tell you what it is and why Heat fans might be concerned next. But David, first tell listeners about our sponsor.
Well, today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay's guaranteed fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know the part will fit, or you get your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay guaranteed fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only, and exclusions do apply.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Everydayers will be back tomorrow with what we expect to see in Game 6 in Miami on Friday night. I want to get to some of the adjustments in Game 6 here in a second, and then the three-point shooting. But I will just – I kind of want to finish up this Jimmy Butler conversation. It hasn't been the superhuman Jimmy Butler series that we saw in Miami. Or, I'm sorry, against Milwaukee.
Yeah.
even in the wins, it still hasn't been superhuman Jimmy Butler. I realized that he sprained
He's
the
hurt.
ankle at the end of the first quarter, or at the end of the first game in the fourth quarter, and it just hasn't been the same. You and I did sort of a postseason player power rankings a few episodes ago, and
Yeah.
you and I both had Jimmy Butler at the top. Since then, I think he's kind of tumbled down those standings. I think Devin Booker was the other guy that you can kind of make an argument for being at the top. He's been just on fire, but it was just sort of a ho-hum game for him in Phoenix the last time in Denver. I think Nikola Jokic is pretty much at the top now of my postseason power rankings. Jimmy Butler's still probably top 3.
Yeah.
I don't know that any of this really matters to Jimmy Butler in terms of where he
No,
is in my power rankings,
not a
but
bit.
I do think I like keeping track of this stuff is all.
That's okay. I mean, look, he's got to play better. And I think he would be his own toughest critic, as he's always been. And it was a little disappointing. I'm sure he probably would have wanted to be a little bit more aggressive. I think he was trying to be a little bit more passive. We've seen this kind of style from Jimmy where he sets everybody else, gets them going. And you texted me during the game. You said if they could just cut it down to 10, we'll get to see that Jimmy Butler resurgence, as we've seen so often during the regular season, during the postseason. That's all they need. Keep it close. Keep it in the mud, as Eric Spoelstra likes to say. Play to their style, establish their identity. They just couldn't get it done. Without Jimmy being dominant in the fourth quarter and with a couple of those momentum shifting plays, just wasn't enough. They didn't have it today, and that's fine. Like I said,
This is a natural rhythm of a playoff series. I think you and I, we went into game 5 against the Milwaukee Bucks and expected a similar kind of response. And this game started to kind of play out in the exact same way, but they just didn't have it at the end. And maybe it's just, hey, the wear and tear on Jimmy Butler. He's much more fresh in the first round than he is the second round, the ankle injury, all these things. But also, you got to give a lot of credit to the New York Knicks for sure for making the plays that they had to make. In terms of the three-point shooting, this is a bigger concern for me than Jimmy Butler looking human once in the playoffs. They shot 45%, the Miami Heat did, after the first round. And I was waiting for the inevitable regression to happen. They shot 35% from 3 in the regular season. David, we're seeing the regression, and we've seen it this entire series. It's just been sort of overlooked because the Heat were doing all the other things. Like, they have not been shooting well from 3-point range all series against the Knicks, but they were out rebounding them. They were being more physical. They were getting the 50-50 balls. They were creating turnovers. They were doing all the things that they had to do. Well, here's what they have shot from 3-point range coming into this game. 33% in game 1, 34.7% in game 2, 22% in game 3, 33% in game 4, and then 30% tonight, 13 of 43. They're now shooting 31% from 3-point range for the series. How concerned are you? Not just in terms of can they wrap up this series, but I think you and I still expect them to go ahead and win this thing Friday night in Miami with home court advantage. But looking ahead even to Philly and Boston, like, they're going to need that 3-point shot to kind of come back the way that it was there in the first round if they're going to have any chance of beating one of those teams in the conference finals.
No, I think that's absolutely true. I wonder, and I was thinking about this, and I know maybe this is a little bit of a segue here, but Miami's identity has been to play tough and tenacious and everything else like that. And of course, allow Jimmy to have those superstar moments. But the way they've played both series is so disparate. Like the differences between how they played against Milwaukee, shooting lights out, to what they've done against the Knicks, being more physical. We talk about it as a cliche in sports all the time. They play down to their opponent. And I think they're kind of seeking their identity based on the style of play of their opponent. They played much more physical against the Knicks.
Yeah.
It's a little bizarre, and you wonder whether or not, depending on who their opponent is, whether or not they raise their game to take their shooting up to that next level the way they did against Milwaukee, going up against Philadelphia or Boston. I don't know. It's a concern, and at the same time,
so you're concerned about it.
I am concerned. You want them to make more shots, but at the same time,
the 3-point shooting. I thought you were still talking about like sort of the chameleon nature, because that was viewed as a strength when they're winning. Oh my God, this team is so versatile. With Spo is such a great coach, all these things, and now I thought you were sort of painting it as a negative. But it's a good point. Like, if they end up playing Boston in the conference finals, does this a good 3-point shooting team, do they suddenly become a good 3-point shooting team again? And if it's Philly, who's more similar to like the New York Knicks in terms of just wanting to get into the paint and be physical and things like that, do they kind of get that series into the mud and stop making those threes? It's an interesting point.
I wonder also. I don't know. I'm just kind of flabbergasted at this because it's been such a bizarre thing. And look, Jimmy, I think he's just
Well, can I
obviously
ask you
hurt.
this?
Yeah.
What do you think is more realistic, that they shoot like they did in one series against the Milwaukee Bucks and most of last season, or what they basically put together in this regular season?
I think obviously this is more realistic, the regular season and what we've seen against the Knicks. But you also look at the shots that they took, and a lot of them were really good shots. Like
Said
Kevin
the
Love
same thing in
going
the
0 for
regular
7.
season.
0 for 7 is really inexplicable because he's been so good in this series again. And in terms of his defense, his rebounding, his outlet passes, and all these different things, he's had on the margins really strong, impactful moments for Miami. And today, just to go 0 for 7 like that is really a head scratching thing. Like he hits a couple of those, and I know it should never boil down to just one player hitting more shots than another, but it kind of feels like those were good looks. Like Miami's still generating good opportunities. You mentioned Jimmy's playmaking, and I think that's a big part of it. That's their nature of their offense. That's all you're going to get. You're either going to get baskets in transition. Their half-court offense has been better than it was during the regular season. It's still not great. You still go to Jimmy whenever he's feeling it and allow him to dominate. We haven't seen that really in this series, except for a few stretches here and there. But as far as the three-point looks are concerned, like Gabe was being able to get wide open spots. Kyle Lowry was able to knock those down, or at least have those looks. He didn't knock them down to the fourth quarter. Duncan is still getting his looks. Max Strus was 4 of 10 from three-point range. I think it's still working.
Duncan and Max were 9 for 20 from three-point range. They were not the problem.
No.
I hear you saying all this, but this was exactly what we're talking about in the regular season. It's why we were so flabbergasted. Like, wow, the looks are good. They're open looks, and they're not going in. And so when you're saying all this, and I'm like, I don't really care that they were open because they were missing open shots in the regular season. And so I don't know. I don't know that just because they were getting open looks, I don't know if this is going to revert back to what it was against Milwaukee or what we saw for 82 games. You know what I mean? And so,
but isn't that part of the? I mean, as Spo has said many times, and as we've talked in this podcast, like at least the process is good. What they're doing works.
Yeah, I have no problem with the shots that they took. I have no problem with it. I just don't know what to expect going forward. Is all I'm saying.
I think the bigger concern is the rebounding, though. Like what we saw from Miami in terms of their gang rebounding, crashing the boards, getting those tipped balls up in the air. New York did that today. Much more effectively than what Miami had.
50 to 34 was the rebound.
Yeah, the overall rebounding edge certainly there, but even just those loose balls, like again, you pointed out in the first quarter, it seemed like Miami was going to be able to dominate based on the fact that they were diving to those balls, 50-50 balls, et cetera. They were tipping the ball, keeping it alive, pulling down a number of offensive rebounds, and that allowed them to get that double-digit lead, and then they went away from that. New York kind of woke up. Julius Randle got into foul trouble early. He got taken out. I don't think it's a coincidence either that New York wound up showing a whole hell of a lot more life with Randle on the bench. And then when Randle did come in, he was starting to feel it offensively to an extent, and he showed a little bit more effort than what he's done in the series to an extent. And look, Jalen Brunson was fantastic. He had a big scoring night, played every minute of the game.
Just made a magic three-pointer in the fourth quarter that had no bit. Like it looked like he sidearmed it like Patrick Mahomes, and it just went into the basket somehow. Like he was awesome. He was and he did like that was the difference, right? Is Jalen Brunson and Quentin Grimes going out there and playing 48 minutes. Nobody on the Heat played 48 minutes, and they should not have played 48 minutes. That was not. They were not the team on the ropes. The Knicks were. Their season was on the line. You expected this from them. Going forward in Game 6, the rebounding thing, yes, that's going to be something that Eric Spoelstra is going to talk about. You know that Bam Adebayo is going to talk about. Like everybody is going to try to gang rebound a little bit more and try to narrow that margin. I'm also looking at the turnovers. The fact that the Heat have not shot well from three-point range and won all these games, a lot of that was creating offense through turnovers and on the break. 5 points off of turnovers tonight for the Heat. The Knicks had 29 points off of 19 turnovers. So the Heat were turning it over too much. And when they did get New York turned over, the Knicks were hustling back in transition. They were doing the right things. But the Heat also just weren't capitalizing on those opportunities the way that they had all series long. So that's going to be, I think, a big emphasis going into Game 6 as well.
Yeah, I hate to keep beating the point here, but it's just so many of those three-pointers rattling out, even as I'm watching it, and I know I'm not playing it, obviously, and yet you kind of feel after every missed shot that there's a little bit less energy there, trying to find a way. It just feels kind of futile. If you're able to keep the ball alive and you keep swinging, making the right play, driving and kicking, and you're kicking it out to a wide open 3-point shooter and they're not knocking it down, it kind of just feels really empty. Like you've done all this work for nothing. And it's very bizarre for Miami not to have that energy because they have had it so consistently. But I don't know. The lack of 3-point shooting was really, really bad.
You're talking right now, and I'm like, did we just go back in time like 2 months? Because it sounds like the conversations we were having in the regular season. Why is this regular season so frustrating? Why isn't this team playing with the kind of effort that we expected? And it's all the same points that we were making. I'm not like, dismissing your points. I think they're good points, but it just, again, my big concern here is, has this reverted back to regular season Miami Heat? And if that's the case, does this team really have any chance? I'm not trying to make too much of a big deal in a game that I think made sense for the Knicks to win and for the Heat to lose, again, with the natural rhythms of an NBA postseason. But the 3-point shooting to me is something that is a concern, bigger picture, moving into what I still expect to be a Miami Heat appearance in the conference finals. What do we make of the free throw disparity in this game? And what about Miami's choice to go hack on Mitchell Robinson late in the game? We get to your questions next here on Locked On Heat. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Every day, as we're going to be back tomorrow with what we expect to see in Game 6 in Miami. You can reach Locked On Heat on Twitter, Instagram. You can email us lockedonheat@gmail.com. If you're watching us on YouTube, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now. If you're listening to the podcast, follow us there as well. Thanks to everybody who wrote in questions using the hashtag AskLOHeat. This one comes from Brian, who writes in, how did the New York City weather affect the team's performance, David? What do you think? I mean, it was a little chilly out. I think it was the 50s or the 60s. The Heat went cold from 3-point range. Coincidence?
Yeah, I think be a huge talking point on ESPN tomorrow. They should continue to harp on that. I think it's a big factor.
Yeah.
New York just seems to thrive in cold weather. Without that oppressive heat in South Florida, no excuses for them. Maybe it has something to do with, again, it was the must-win game for them, and they played as desperately as they could. And they had two players played all 48 minutes of the game, and a lot of things broke.
Nope.
No, it wasn't that.
It was the breeze.
Weather.
It was the breeze. Yep.
You're right. You're probably right.
Ken writes in, was hack a Mitchell Robinson a good strategy? What do you think?
I think it was. At that point in time, you're trying to ebb away and chip away at a lead. They had cut it down, and then they, unfortunately, they just couldn't seem to muster the right kind of shots or get any of those momentum plays that I've been referring to. And then you're trying to slow down the game a little bit. You try to, you're probably going to give up a score on the other end just because Miami just didn't seem to have it locked in defensively either. Yeah. Or if you foul them, and again, a lot of foul calls against Miami, you're putting them on the line, putting better shooters on the line with the opportunity to knock down 2 free throws. So I think it made sense. It wasn't like Mitchell Robinson was electric from the free throw line. He was just 4 of 8. And yet I think it worked. I think they did exactly what they were supposed to do. Try to, keep the clock from running, try to put Robinson on the line. I was a little surprised because I don't think we've ever seen Eric Spoelstra go to that strategy.
I was just trying to think about it. I had no recollection of him ever going hacka with anybody. Like, I'm trying to think back to the Big 3 era. Maybe it happened at some point. I just can't remember him ever doing it. If our listeners, viewers remember it, please let us know in the comments, because I really can't recall. I'm not saying it hasn't happened, but I just can't remember it. I actually really like the strategy.
Yeah.
At that point, I kind of looked at it when they started going hacka. Mitchell Robinson then was a +9. The Knicks were outscoring the Heat by 9 points in Mitchell Robinson's minutes. I thought it was an interesting sort of chess move by Eric Spoelstra, because it basically is like, okay, we're going to start hacking Mitchell Robinson. We expect him to maybe go 50% the line. He ended up making 3 of his 4 shots, hacka shots at the foul line. So credit to Mitchell Robinson for making his free throws. But we'll get a chance to set our defense. We'll do all this stuff and kind of get into our offensive sets and all these things and just get a little bit more organized, because it felt like they were so disorganized before that. So I thought it was a great strategy. And then it kind of challenges Tibbs. Well, you're going to let us keep doing this. Are you going to take Mitchell Robinson out? Because at that point, while Mitchell Robinson was a +9, Isaiah Hartenstein was a -4.
Right.
And he was not nearly as impactful as Mitchell Robinson was in terms of pressuring the rim, being a presence defensively, and all those things. So I was like, okay, this is a great chess move, because either it helps you get organized if Mitchell Robinson stays in the game, or Tibbs takes him out and you put the worst player on the floor and you take an impactful player off of the floor. That's exactly what ended up happening. The Heat make their little bit of a run. It ultimately did not work, but I thought it was a really interesting move by Eric Spoelstra. Just another thing that he had kind of in his back pocket ready to go that nobody was expecting. Greg writes in, the free throw disparity, not a question, just saying. Greg knows the show. He knows I hate talking about officiating, but I think it is worth at least pointing out that the Knicks took 40 free throws and the Heat had 19. What did you make of it?
Not much. I rarely, even game 2 when there was a couple egregious Scott Foster type calls, whatever. You never really pointed that. It wasn't the sum story. It was part of the story, maybe a very, very brief chapter of it. And yes, they took a lot of free throws, but I think, look, Brunson is going to flop. Like, he's just going to sell contact. He's going to draw contact. That's just the nature of who he is as a player. He's physical for his size. He's going to attack Gabe Vincent, and he's going to get foul calls against Gabe. Randall's also very physical. They both took a lot of free throws today. And look, you can't disparage the Knicks for doing what we've seen Jimmy Butler do throughout his Heat tenure.
Kyle Lowry does the same thing. The Heat flop as much as anybody. They do.
Yeah. They sell contact, and I don't want to call it flopping necessarily, but they sell contact, and they get to the line. I think we saw some flops in the New York end. There were a couple calls that might have gone Miami's way that did it. But again, it doesn't matter.
I think the only foul call that I really had an issue with was the hook RJ Barrett had on Kyle Lowry. Fair. And that is a really tough call to officiate because it really just matters when the referee happens to look and at what angle the referee is looking. He obviously did not see RJ Barrett initiate the hook, initiate the contact. All he saw was Lowry kind of pulling Barrett down because his arm was around his arm. That was a bad call because it was Lowry's 5th foul and he had to come out of the game. And I actually wondered, and I tweeted this too I was like, I think Spo should just leave him in. Like, I thought he should just, because the momentum was such that it made sense. And Lowry was a big reason for that 4th quarter run, probably even more than Jimmy Butler was.
He hit 2 3-pointers prior to that.
And assisted on another one, had a big steal. He was awesome. Or no, not a steal. It was he grabbed an offensive rebound away from Mitchell Robinson. That would have been an extra Knicks possession, and the Heat scored on the other end. Like, he was awesome in that 4th quarter. It was all the Kyle Lowry stuff. I thought he was about to be the story of the game, and then RJ Barrett hooks him. He has to sit. I would have been interested to know Spo in retrospect would have wished that he would have kept him in there. Gabe Vincent was in foul trouble. You mentioned that before, but he was also kind of pressing Jalen Brunson full court. And the fact that Jalen Brunson played 48 minutes meant that there was just more exposure of Gabe Vincent on Jalen Brunson. And so that was going to just be more foul calls available for, or potentially for Gabe Vincent to pick up. So I think that's what it was. I didn't have any issues really. I mean, like you said, Jalen sells the contact, but there was contact. So I didn't really have an issue with any of the Gabe Vincent calls. And that's just sort of what's going to happen. So we'll see, man. I don't, like you, I didn't have an issue with the officiating. I thought it was worth pointing out the big one on Kyle Lowry there at the end. That could have switched the game.
I will say that turnover by Jimmy late in the 4th quarter, I mentioned to you before we started recording, you didn't seem to think so.
Quentin Grimes.
Yeah, when he got up and he wound up poking the ball out. I think the replay kind of came across Jimmy's body to a certain degree. Jimmy didn't seem to argue it. Again, kind of summing up the game. At that point, I guess he felt it was too late to try and mount a comeback, and they didn't make the call in his favor. He wasn't going to sell it. He wasn't going to flop and try and sell the contact. He just watched as they executed the fast break opportunity that increased their lead even further. Just watching it there, though, I think that Grimes fouled Jimmy. They didn't call it, so it doesn't matter. It's over. Like, even whether they call it or not, the game's over. You can't spend your time debating these things. They
didn't lose because of the officiating. They did not lose because of the officiating. Let's be quick with this last one.
All right, no, I was just asking you guys a follow-up. What do you think is the biggest reason why they lost? Was it the 3-point shooting? Was it defensive execution?
They didn't make the threes, and the Knicks just played with more force. They played with more effort. They were better at rebounding. They won those things in the margins that the Heat had been winning before, and the Knicks just outplayed the Heat. And I said it before, I'll say it again. This is the first game all playoffs where the Heat, I thought, were just thoroughly, without a doubt, outplayed. Jimmy Butler, TNT shows him you sent me the clip. TNT shows him walking into the arena with a limp. You and I kind of thought he might have been exaggerating that limp. I still think that he might have been playing for the cameras a little bit. But we kind of hinted at it earlier. Are you worried about Jimmy Butler's ankle? Do you think it's a larger concern going forward, game 6, even beyond? How worried are you about it. Do you think it impacted his performance tonight?
I wasn't worried before today. I am now because we haven't seen Jimmy take his foot off the gas, and you wonder with this version of Jimmy that we're so accustomed to seeing, if he's taking his foot off the gas, it's because he can't press down the pedal effectively, because his ankle is hurting him. So I am concerned, not just for Game 6, but also if Miami continues to move forward in the playoffs. If they're able to eliminate the Knicks on Friday, or in Game 7, if it gets down to that point, you wonder whether or not Jimmy's ever going to be healthy again to the point where he was so good in that first round against Milwaukee. Like that, I mean, we're talking about historic levels, and he's been very good against the Knicks, with the exception of tonight. And then you wonder whether or not the more pressure he has to put on it, the more physicality he has to deal with, whether it's Josh Hart, Jalen Brunson, Julius Randle. Like Jimmy's defending Julius Randle too. There were moments there where he got switched onto Randle, and they left him out on Ocean knowing he could do a good job. For the most part, he did. But that's still putting a lot of pressure on his lower extremities, having to kind of get down in position, try to put his elbow into Julius's back, try to keep him from establishing position. That's all going to hurt. It's going to take its wear and tear on Jimmy's ankles. So you wonder whether or not it's going to be an issue because, well, it just hasn't seemed like an issue up to this point. But now that it does, you have to wonder whether it is and whether or not he can finally find some magic remedy on Friday night to help Miami seal the deal.
It's a physical series. The Heat players have said it's a physical series. That's going to just take its natural wear and tear on a body, and just the fact that he's dealing with this sprained ankle issue. It is a concern. It's been a concern. We have not seen superhuman Jimmy Butler in kind of a while now in this series. I'm wondering if that's still there. I don't want to sound the alarms too loudly. Right. I'm not there yet. Again, it's just one loss. I think it's the first game the Heat were outplayed in this postseason. You can really kind of boil it down to them missing a bunch of 3-pointers and not capitalizing off turnovers. And maybe this game is a little bit different, right? You also got to tip your hat to the Knicks. But I'm thinking more forward. And if they're going to play a physical series against Philadelphia, where they're going to ask you to bang bodies in the paint just like the Knicks are, or against the Boston Celtics, who kind of just come at you in waves here and there, right? They're a little bit more finesse than Philly. But look, when it comes to health and this Heat team, I always just kind of have an underlying level of concern because that's what we've been accustomed to seeing from this group. But that'll do it for us today. Thanks again for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Everydayers, we'll be back tomorrow with what to expect to see in Game 6 in Miami. Hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Follow us on your podcast app. Thanks for joining us, David. Thanks for joining me.
You got it, Wes.